The mourners wept. The church smelled of roses and grief. And at the pulpit, the killer himself stood, speaking words of comfort over the coffin he had filled. His voice trembled not from guilt, but from the thrill of control. They never suspected him. Not then. Not ever. Until the day his own words betrayed him. But what happened next shocked everyone. This is the story of Martin Hale. To neighbors in the small Midwestern town of Ridgewater, he was the kind soul who volunteered at every memorial, a man who could put loss into beautiful words. The grieving families adored him. His eulogies made strangers cry. But behind the polished sympathy and gentle smile was a darkness no one saw coming. Between 1995 and 2002, Ridgewater's funerals began to outnumber its weddings. And yet every time a life was cut short, Hale was there, pen in hand, ready to immortalize the dead. We post daily. Subscribe so you never miss a case. Martin Hale was the kind of man who made a town feel safer just by existing. At least that's what Ridgewater believed. He was soft-spoken, with neatly parted hair and glasses that always caught the light in a way that made him look scholarly, trustworthy. He lived in a modest, ivy-covered house on Hawthorne Street, just far enough from the center of town to be private, but close enough to walk to Sunday service without a coat in winter. To most, he was the perfect neighbor, the man who would shovel your driveway without being asked, who remembered your birthday, who brought soup when you were sick. He worked as a creative writing instructor at the local community college. His students described him as encouraging, never raising his voice, always leaning in with genuine interest when they spoke. He read their work carefully, offering notes in neat, looping handwriting. On evenings when he wasn't teaching, he was in the town library, lost in books about history, poetry, and grief counseling. He claimed it was for the sake of his writing. But Martin had a habit that most found charming, even admirable. He attended almost every funeral in Ridgewater. Whether he knew the deceased well or not, he was there. He'd sit quietly, often toward the back, listening intently to the service. Over time, people began asking him to speak. His words were beautiful, precise, and heartbreakingly personal. He made the dead feel known, even to those who barely knew them. It was during the fall of 1995 that the town's steady rhythm began to falter. The leaves had barely started to turn when tragedy struck. Sarah Mitchell, a bright, kind-hearted woman of 27, was found dead in her home. The police called it a robbery gone wrong. But nothing of value was missing. The town was rattled, yet grateful that Martin, who'd known Sarah through a church reading group, offered to write and deliver her eulogy. It was so moving that people whispered afterward it was the most touching speech they'd ever heard. The months that followed were restless. 2 more women, both living alone, died under sudden and unexplained circumstances. The official causes varied: an accident, a supposed medical emergency, but the grief felt the same. And in each case, Martin appeared, offering to help with arrangements, penning words that painted vivid portraits of lives cut short. He spoke of their routines, their private joys, their fears, things no one realized he should have known. By 1997, the town had grown used to the string of losses, chalking it up to terrible luck. No one questioned the man who always showed up with comfort and casseroles. No one noticed that he gravitated toward certain houses. No one saw the shadow moving beneath the surface of his calm, deliberate life. Not until one funeral, when Martin's words revealed something no outsider should have known. Something that would mark the beginning of Ridgewater's darkest truth. It was the night of April 14, 1998, when the quiet rhythm of Ridgewater shattered again. Emily Hart, 32, was known for her warm laugh, her love of gardening, and the tiny blue cottage she kept in perfect order on Willow Lane. That night, neighbors recalled, the air was unseasonably still. No wind, no barking dogs, just an unsettling silence. At 8:45 p.m., Emily called her sister to say she was making tea before bed. By 9:10 her porch light went out. No one saw her again. The next morning, when she failed to show up for work, a concerned coworker stopped by. The front door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the living room was untouched, no signs of struggle, but the kitchen told another story. A ceramic mug lay shattered, tea leaves scattered like confetti on the linoleum. The wall clock was cracked, its hands frozen at 2:17 a.m. And at the center of it all, Emily lay lifeless, a thin cord still looped around her neck. The responding officers found no fingerprints, no forced entry, no missing valuables. Whoever had been there came and went like a ghost. The town was stunned. Another woman, another sudden death, another unanswered question. People spoke in hushed voices at the grocery store, glanced over their shoulders at night. Parents told daughters to lock their windows, to never walk alone after dark. 4 days later, the funeral was held at St. Mary's Church. The pews overflowed. White lilies framed the coffin. And at the pulpit, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, stood Martin Hale. He began softly, his voice trembling with what seemed like grief. He spoke of Emily's garden, how she nurtured roses that blushed in the morning sun. He described her nightly routine tea with honey, a radio playing old jazz standards, and how she wrapped herself in a blue robe before stepping into the quiet kitchen. That last detail made Detective Samuel Royce, seated in the back row, go still. The robe had never been mentioned in the press. It was an observation shared only in the crime scene report. Emily's sister had confirmed it to police in private, noting it was her sister's favorite. How could Martin know? After the service, whispers spread. Some thought Martin's words were simply poetic imagination. Others found the precision unsettling. At the wake, an elderly neighbor told the detective she'd glimpsed a man walking away from Emily's home the night she died. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat. She hadn't mentioned it earlier. She didn't want to interrupt the mourning. Detective Royce left the wake with a single thought pressing in on him. Martin Hale wasn't just a man who comforted the grieving. He might be the reason they were grieving at all. And if that was true, it meant he was already choosing his next victim. Detective Samuel Royce didn't move recklessly. He knew that in small towns, rumors spread faster than evidence. If Martin Hale was the killer, one wrong step could send him into hiding or push him to strike again. So Royce began quietly. He requested copies of every eulogy Martin had written over the past 7 years. Late nights in his cramped office, Royce read them line by line. At first, they were just moving tributes, the kind that drew tears. But patterns began to surface. Each speech contained at least one vivid detail that investigators had kept from the public. The exact color of a victim's nightgown, the song playing on a record player moments before death, the precise position of a body when it was found. Royce knew that wasn't coincidence. Surveillance teams shadowed Martin's movements. By day, he taught his classes, shopped for groceries, visited the library. But at night, he took long walks through Ridgewater, favoring routes that led past the homes of women living alone. He lingered under street lamps, pausing to glance at drawn curtains as though mapping invisible boundaries. The investigation took a turn when police reviewed cold case files. The similarities were chilling. All victims were women between 25 and 40, all lived within a 2-mile radius of Martin's home, and all were killed in ways that left minimal evidence: strangulation, suffocation, methods that required close contact. But without a direct link, Royce couldn't move. Martin's home, when searched under a casual community safety pretense, was spotless. His typewriter ribbon had been replaced, erasing any drafts of his eulogies. His garbage held nothing but grocery receipts and coffee grounds. Royce needed a way to trap him. That chance came during the funeral of Claire Donnelly, the latest victim. Before the service, an officer in plain clothes casually told Martin a fabricated detail: that Claire had been holding a red silk scarf when she died. It was a lie. There was no scarf. 2 days later, Martin delivered her eulogy. In it, he spoke softly of how the red silk slipped from her fingers as her eyes closed. The room wept. Royce felt his pulse spike. It was the confirmation he needed. With a warrant in hand, the team returned to Martin's home. This time they searched every inch. In the attic, behind an old dresser, they found a locked cedar chest. Inside lay the truth: jewelry, hair clips, a child's photograph with a corner torn away, pressed flowers from graves, and most damning Polaroids of each victim, some alive, some taken after death. Every case detail matched the timeline of Ridgewater's tragedies. Martin had kept their lives and their deaths, cataloged like chapters in a private book. When Royce closed the chest, he knew the eulogies were never about honoring the dead. They were the killer's final possession, a way to relive the moment, again and again, in front of the very people he deceived. And Martin Hale had just written his last one. It was a crisp October morning in 2003 when the final act of Martin Hale's performance came to an abrupt, unscripted end. The town had gathered for the funeral of 29-year-old Lauren Price, a local nurse found strangled in her apartment just days earlier. As mourners filled the pews, Martin stood near the pulpit, notes in hand, rehearsing under his breath. He had done this so many times before that it felt almost ceremonial. But this time he wouldn't speak. Halfway down the aisle, Detective Samuel Royce entered with 2 uniformed officers. The sound of their shoes on the wooden floor echoed louder than the whispers that followed. Martin looked up, confusion flickering across his face, quickly replaced by a faint smile that seemed almost defiant. "Martin Hale," Royce said, voice steady, You're under arrest for the murders of 8 women in Ridgewater between 1995 and 2003. The handcuffs clicked shut. The congregation gasped. Some cried out. Others sat frozen, clutching tissues and hymn books as the man they trusted was led away from the very altar where he had wrapped them in words of comfort for nearly a decade. The trial that followed became the most sensational event Ridgewater had ever seen. The prosecution unveiled the cedar chest, laying out its contents piece by piece before the jury. Each item was a silent witness. A silver locket belonging to Sarah Mitchell, a pressed lily from Emily Hart's funeral, a Polaroid of Claire Donnelly taken just hours before her death. The eulogies were read aloud in court. Jurors shifted uncomfortably as they realized the same words that had once soothed them were, in truth, trophies crafted to immortalize Martin's power over life and death. Forensic experts confirmed that hair strands in the chest matched the victims. A handwriting analyst testified that Martin's journal entries mirrored the cadence of his eulogies, each entry a meticulous reconstruction of the crime, as if he were reliving it on the page. The defense tried to paint him as a man suffering from delusion, a poet who blurred fantasy and reality. But the evidence was too precise, too deliberate. After 3 weeks, the verdict came back, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When asked by reporters why he wrote the eulogies, Martin offered no apology, only a single sentence. "It was my way of keeping them." Even behind bars, his shadow lingers. Cold case units across the state have reopened unsolved murders, looking for the telltale signature, intimate details woven into public remembrance. Some investigators believe the real number of victims could be double what was proven in court. In Ridgewater, funerals feel different now. People still gather, still mourn, but there's a wariness in the air, a suspicion that evil doesn't always hide in dark alleys. Sometimes it stands in the front pew, smiling gently, holding a piece of paper. And perhaps, somewhere out there, another killer is speaking over another coffin, his words hiding a truth no one yet suspects.